In the darkest night, we find our light. Battered souls, but we won't lose sight. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, we stand tall. United forever. Strength and courage will overcome. Oh, surviving together, victorious, never, never alone. Hand in hand, we'll face the unknown.
We see you, we hear you, and we believe you.
Hey, everyone, how you doing? Still working on trying to get my external camera to work. My hair's an absolute disaster today, but welcome to Surviving Together. We have a great live for you here today with a special guest. Surviving Together is a safe space for trauma survivors to come together, connect, build community on their healing journey, as well as providing trauma-related education for all. And today we are going to be talking about abuse in the disabled persons population. And how does this differ from the able-bodied population? But first, before we get started, I wanted to show you what came in the mail yesterday. I'm so excited. So my trophy from Women Changing the World finally came for winning the Women in Journalism category. So this is my little gold statue, and they sent me a wonderful little card along with it. So I need to get like a little shelf for behind here, and I'm gonna put that up there. So that'll be good. Hi, Patty. How are you doing? Indigo, how are you? Yeah, Indigo, I can try and resend it. Maybe I have an old address for you. Probably what'll work better is, can you just send me an email, like just saying hi or something? And then I'll respond to that one. And then I know it's a good email for you. Because I've sent two, and I two weeks apart, and hadn't gotten a response from you. So yeah, I'm thinking maybe my email for you isn't working or something. All right, perfect. That works. Deidre Gore, how are you doing today? Welcome to all of you here. Well, I am going to bring up Sharon Birn, and she is going to be talking to you talking with us about abuse in disabled persons population. Let me add her to the screen here. Hi, Sharon. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today, Mac. And
Thank you.
congratulations again on your winning your category, Women in Journalism. And congratulations on the award. And I can't wait to see it up behind you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I was so excited when it came yesterday. I didn't even know it got delivered. My son's got an app when anything's like delivered to the
Yeah.
house through the post or whatever. And he's like, I got a package, but I have no idea what it is. And I picked it up and I'm like, it's from Australia. I know what it is. It's not for you. It's for me. So I was so excited about that. Let me just introduce Sharon real quick. Sharon is a life coach, as well as she's starting to get into financial advising. She's learning about that and getting certificates in that. She is also a certified personal trainer for abled and disabled people. So Sasha specializes in adaptive fitness, which is incredible. And she does a lot of advocacy work with the disabled population. I know that she's a published author, And she is one of the people who helped me with my chapter and gave me some wonderful suggestions on that. And so, welcome, Sharon. Welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you again for having me. Thank you to everybody who's here live and anybody watching on the replay.
Mhm.
Glad you're here as well. Just very grateful to be here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Something I have a lot of professional experience with, as well as personal experience. So it's definitely a topic that, a lot of people are afraid to speak, as you're
Mhm.
well aware. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers are well aware and have experienced that. But in the disabled population, I I do believe that people are even more afraid to speak up, and we can get into why in a minute or two. But
Right, exactly. Yeah, definitely something that we'll be speaking about. Indigo had a quick question as to what your book is called. What's some of the
I have
publications that you've been
I
with?
have written in quite a few anthologies. One is one is Bullied: How We Survived. Um, and all of these are available on Amazon. I've written in A Note to My Family with Nick. Some of you may know her as the Gifted Bipolar Writer or Guiding Brilliant Writer publishing company. I've written in with Lonnie Ray. That was the Bullied anthology. Plus, I did her July 4th edition of her Rattled Awake. I believe it was called, it had something, the title had something to do with independence, to match Independence Day and freedom. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's that one. My first anthology, the opportunity was given to me by Dr. CJ Leland and Susanna Dawn, and that was Moving Beyond Boxes. I'm trying to think. I think I've covered them all, but yeah, I've written in some of them. I've written multiple chapters, so I know with Lonnie, I wrote multiple chapters in a few of the
Hmm.
anthologies. So yeah, but
Awesome.
all of them are available on Amazon. And if you are interested and you want me to make it easier for you, and if it's okay with you, Mac, I can go back and get all the links for the books and drop.
Absolutely. I'm happy to put that in the
Yeah.
video description. Yeah, I can drop
Okay.
that there, and that way people can link up with it if they're
Okay.
interested.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Um, why don't we just start off with why don't you tell everybody about your disability and how you fit into this world?
Well, this works out really well because I do have one more anthology that just came out recently, and it's called um, "We Choose to Be More Than Our Diagnosis." And there
Oh,
are
with Crystal.
with Crystal wrote in that one, yes, and that's
Yes.
also published by Nick, Guiding Brilliant Writers and the Gifted Bipolar Writers. There's 16 of us who wrote about our different diagnoses and the way that it has impacted our life, but even more so how we've chosen and how we navigated, not just chosen. It is a choice, but then how we made it after we made the choice to be more than our diagnosis, how we navigated that process and how we still navigate that process today. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
have a diagnosis, it's, for a lot of people, it's lifelong,
Mm-hmm.
especially in terms of the book. And the people, what it is about chronic conditions and disabilities and illnesses and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born with cerebral palsy,
Okay.
specifically spastic. It depending on what doctor you ask. Some say I'm a diplegia, some say I'm a quadriplegia, which just means that some doctors feel that only my lower body was affected by my spasticity and my CP, whereas other doctors have felt that all of my limbs are can be spastic and get tight and be affected by my CP. I let them
What do
have
you feel?
I let them
It's
have that
your
argument.
body,
I
right?
know. I let them have that argument. Honestly, I know that when I was first diagnosed, they said I was a quadriplegia, and I agree with that diagnosis, even though my arms are much less affected, because I remember being a child and having to go through physical therapy and occupational therapy, and them working to really increase the range of motion and the stiffness in my muscles. So I would tend to agree with those that have died. I'm just very good at keeping my upper body more limber than I am my lower body, because it does affect my lower body more. It's definitely,
Now,
yeah,
well,
go
for
ahead.
people who don't know what cerebral palsy is, can you give a kind of brief description as to
I,
what it is and how it
I
affects your body?
absolutely. So cerebral palsy is a neuromuscular disability. And what that means is it affects, for those of you that may not know, it affects how the muscles and the nerves and and the brain communicate. And cerebral palsy is damage to the cerebrum, hence the CP. Um, and It really is an umbrella term, that because there's a really large continuum of how cerebral
Oh,
palsy can affect each individual and the individual body. So it's kind of like, I liken it, because more people are familiar with autism and the autism spectrum. So
hmm,
if you're familiar with the autism spectrum, you know that there's a real range of severity of disability to very mild impact of the disability. So cerebral palsy is the same. So for me, I've been told by multiple neurologists I'm kind of middle of the road. And
okay.
here's why. Because CP can give you a lot of cognitive deficits and challenges, whereas
Mm,
and very few physical. Or you can have the other way, where you can be severely impacted physically, or you can't walk, talk, use your hands, things like that. To But your intellect and your cognition is intact. So,
oh,
and then
no
there's
idea.
yeah, and then there's anything in between. CP um,
Wow.
it's mostly, okay, I shouldn't say that. It's very much so acquired at birth still. It's either
Hmm,
during, in vitro, in utero, sorry, or during the birthing process, or right after the birthing process, something occurs where there's
hmm.
damage to the cerebrum. And depending on where the damage to the cerebrum is, that will depend on how the individual is
Well,
affected by the CP. Because your
okay.
cerebrum affects your motor function,
Hmm.
your gross and your fine motor function. And so um, all those, depending on where it's damaged, that will be where you will see I hate this word, but that's where you'll see the limitation or the deficit, or the not
Hmm.
reaching of a milestone. But cerebral palsy, because it is, people hate when I say this, but it is what it is brain damage. And so cerebral palsy can be acquired through an accident or a fall, a car
Oh,
accident, a fall. It really depends on, most people are familiar with it being acquired, like I said, somewhere in the
at
birthing
birth. Right. Yeah,
process.
that's what I always thought.
But it can be, because it is an umbrella term that just kind of covers a broad spectrum of damage to the cerebrum. You can acquire it, after, anytime during your life. Usually, when that occurs, you'll get a dual diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury, but they'll also
Okay.
say you have, depending on how the traumatic brain injury is documented, they may say you have cerebral palsy as a result of the TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Indigo says I didn't know you could get it from a different way other than birth. And
Most people,
that's
that's how
how I'd always known of it.
most people get it that way.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like I said, the reason people say that or it's been now known that you can acquire it later on, is because it is damage to the cerebrum, and you can
Right.
damage your cerebrum, in any
In
way.
various ways.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. At any
So,
time in your life.
right.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So, we talked the other day
Hmm.
and we kind of had decided, there's so much to talk about in terms of abuse with the disabled population.
Yeah.
And so today's going to kind of be an overview, guys, of, you know, Sharon's story and just the abuse that occurs. And we wanted to start with, I kind of pulled the stats about this in terms of disabled versus able-bodied
Hmm.
people. And it looks like um, worldwide, So this is going to be a range, but worldwide, that the disabled population is at risk anywhere from 1.5 to 4 times the able-bodied population in terms of abuse, that there are rates of abuse. And so you can see that that's a very wide range because we're talking about the world. In the US, it looks like it's anywhere from 2 to 3 times. Disabled
Mhm.
people will experience different forms of abuse anywhere from 2 to 3 times. And when I was looking specifically at violence, whether that's domestic violence or just a physical assault or a sexual assault, it was anywhere from about 2.5 to 3 times
Mhm.
the able-bodied population. From your perspective, what accounts for the such drastic difference in terms of
There are many
these
things that
statistics?
account for the drastic difference. One is reporting. People, when somebody with a disability experiences abuse, if they're living in a group home, if they're not living with their family, but even if they're living with their family, it can get reported to APS, and then APS is required to report it to other authorities. So,
Mhm.
um, and if they're living in a group home, there's the Department of Justice, the disabled population, the overseers of the disabled population and the service provision, whether it's a day program or a residence or even some family in home family programs that are funded. You are immediately a mandated reporter if you
Mhm.
suspect anything. So it doesn't even have to be the person with the physical disability reporting the abuse. Many times, when you have somebody who's a non disabled person, they will not report because they're too afraid. And believe me,
Mhm.
disabled people are paranoid and petrified to report because this is another thing that, why there's such a varied, staggering difference in the statistics. People with disabilities, whether it's cognitive or physical, um, you're kind of you're caught between a rock and a hard place because if you're nonverbal, it's very hard to get people to believe your side of the story because you can't even articulate your side of the story. If your cognition is lower, you might not know how to articulate it, and unless you're dealing with a professional who can, use play therapy or other kinds of things, a lot of times if somebody's nonverbal, you have to go off of what the other staff might see or what a family member might see. So there's a lot of protection
Mhm.
within, families and within service providers. Even though we have these safeguards in place, there are people who will protect other people either because that's what they want to do because they're friends with them or it's a family member or because they've been threatened themselves. If
Mhm.
you tell this, then I'm going to tell this, and there's a lot of
Right.
that. And the other thing is people with disabilities, cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities like myself, we are dependent on people to help us navigate the world.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of my physical abilities, so I can dress myself, I can, you know, cook for myself, but and a lot of other activities of daily living, I need either no help or minimal help with certain things because I live in my house was made to my specifications, so my house is
Okay.
as close to utopia for me as I'm going to get. It's not utopia, but it's damn close. So,
Right.
but there's a lot of people who it breaks my heart to say this, but they're dependent on others to get them out of bed, to get them dressed, to feed them, to cook for them. So
Mhm.
if they complain, they're afraid that that's going to go away. And as much as they don't want to be abused,
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be laying in bed doing nothing either. And
Right.
I have seen many cases professionally where you're not believed. You have to go, you have sometimes the extreme that you have to go to get yourself to be believed is unbelievable, truthfully. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that is true for people who are able bodied too. And that's one thing I want to say. There is a staggering difference in the statistics. And like I said, a lot of it I think has to do with reporting and how we report. A lot of it has to do with fear based, um,
Mm-hmm.
be silenced, being silenced out of fear. But the other thing with it is people with disabilities are people. So
Absolutely.
even though there's a staggering difference, if you were to have myself and other other disabled people on a panel with able-bodied people who have experienced abuse, you would see a lot of similarities because people are people.
Yep. Yep.
But there is no denying the gap in the statistics. But there's not. It's not so much about is the abuse the same or different, and does one matter more than the other, or it's
Mm-hmm.
not anything like that at all. And I want to make sure that's clear because it's just a matter of many people who are abused, who are physically or disabled in some way cognitively. They if you have a lower IQ and you don't have the same social um you know education or skill level as somebody
Mm-hmm.
else, for many people with disabilities, it's this authority person, this person
Right.
who's my caregiver just told me to do X.
Mm-hmm.
And they're you're many times they're not going to do it because it's linked to something they want. If you don't do this, then you're not going to be able to go to the movies, or I'm not going to drive you to work. And there's a level of control um, that happens. And so there is a whole bunch of things that go into the reporting, the versus not reporting, and just the overall. How do you? I mean, I was an investigative reporter for a lot of the agencies that I worked for. They had me investigating, abuse cases, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
parent to child or staff to child. And the one thing I can tell, well, there's a lot that I could tell you, but the one important thing that I could tell you about this is unless you have conclusive evidence, the person is not going to be punitively punished. And there are
Mm-hmm.
so many cases, at least when I was doing it, that came back inconclusive because
Yeah.
you had different people saying different things about the event. And one was somebody else's perception. And it was hard to say sometimes, was somebody covering something up for somebody? And to be honest, people people in general, but people with disabilities, if they're angry with a staff member, just like a child who's angry with a parent, I've had this happen in my professional travels. I've seen this too. Children that are angry with their parents will say, "Oh, well, my dad hit me, or my mom hit me, or my aunt or my
Mm-hmm.
guardian hit me," and there was no abuse occurred, but they started that uh, snowball, and then there has to be an investigation. So if you can't come up with a conclusive reason to punitively, fire the person or say they need to be retrained, there are very few circumstances where somebody will be terminated immediately. No, like no,
Mm-hmm.
very little investigation, and just there's very few uh, categories where that's okay. And I've been on both sides of it where people say, well, I could see that, how you could do that. And I've been on the side where I've been with other people who have said, but I could see why this should be just a no, you're done. Um, so
You
yeah.
know, and what you're saying, it really goes to, you know, people with disabilities are people first, right?
Exactly.
And as we were talking before, there's going to be nasty people within that population,
Yep,
and there's going to be great people within that
exactly.
population, just like with able-bodied people. And a lot of the circumstances that you're talking about, reliance on other people, the level of the
Yeah,
vulnerableness. You see this with children not being believed,
absolutely.
able-bodied children not being believed, right?
Yep.
And you see it with the
I
elderly.
was going to say
And
elderly abuse happens for the same reason.
right, exactly. So you see the same things, but there does seem to be something about how society at large views somebody with a disability as being inherently less than for some reason. And I don't understand that. And I guess part of that's just because of the way that I was raised. And also, I think a fear of the unknown. If you've never known anybody who's had any
Yeah.
sort of disability, whether it's cognitive or physical
Two of my,
limitation, it's like, how do I deal with this person?
yep,
What am I supposed to do? And I think the underlying message I'm hearing from you is you just treat them as a person.
absolutely. Look, if you see somebody who obviously can't communicate, through their words or verbally, and you'll usually see that they have some kind of communication device. And it may, in today's world, an iPad can be a communication device. There are um, apps that you can get for an iPad if you have a speech impediment or you have no verbal skills. You can put these programs on your iPad and you can communicate um, with your iPad. So we've come a long way in terms of technology. But I think you bring up such a valuable point. And what I say to this is when you have a disability that's documented, and it could be whether you're born with it or whether you acquire it. There is a little bit of a difference, which I'll touch on in a second. However, um, you're seen as though you need to be taken care of,
Hmm.
especially when you're born with your disability, because you're born already limited. And I say that way only because people who acquire their disability through injury or illness or accident of some sort, they when they go through their rehabilitation, the goal is to get them as close to their functioning level as they
Hmm.
were prior to injury.
Hmm.
So even if they have to use a wheelchair, no joke, even if they have to use a wheelchair or a walker, they are going to be viewed as this is what they were able to do prior to their injury. Let's get them as close to that functioning level as we can, even if we have to reteach them how to do it from a sitting position or standing in a prone stander that
Hmm.
they have. We will teach them. We will get when you have a disability. It's like, well, you've come into the world damaged, so now,
It's like before they had a baseline of independence,
right,
right? Or
mhm,
at least a sense of self
right,
without the disability.
correct,
And how can I at least get back that?
right.
Whereas when you're born with it, that's been your entire life.
Exactly. And so people are used to having to take care of you. And
Hmm.
it shows up, and this is where a lot of abuse starts to happen. And I know that might sound crazy, but what I mean by this is so I had people when I was growing up, I had people in my family, and I had people when I would go out into the community. I'd be with people, and like I'd be ordering a meal at a restaurant, and they'd say, "Well, what does she want?" And this used to irritate my father to no end. And my mother would start answering, God love her,
Hmm.
the nurturer that she is. And my father would be like, "Excuse me, but she's got a big mouth. So
Yeah.
you be quiet and you order your dinner or you're not eating."
Yeah.
And then the waiter or waitress, you know. So
Probably not even realizing, not
no,
even, th- they probably didn't even,
they
consciously make the
don't.
decision
No,
of, I'm not going to consider this a person. But I think
exactly.
you've seen that with kids too, right? Doctors are
Yeah,
more apt to talk to the kids now in appointments.
absolutely.
It's been a whole mind
It's a
shift.
shift, but it's an absolute shift. But so I do think, and that's some of the reason for the staggering difference in the statistics, because one one set of the population is viewed as they need to be taken care of, you know, and the other set of the population, either whether they're able-bodied or the people that have been injured, there's a whole different approach and
Hmm.
mindset to the approach. And that is shifting, but it is we go through phases where we start to really shift, and then something happens and the shift gets pulled back. And
Hmm.
so it's a constant, two steps forward, three steps back. But we've come a long way. But the incidence of the need to be dependent on somebody for your physical safety, for your cognitive safety, where you can't make, where let's say, you need somebody else to be your decision maker for you, right? Because
Hmm.
you're not considered, you don't have the intellectual level to make informed medical decisions or things like that. You have to really hope that you're winding up with the good people, and there are a lot of good people, and there
Right.
are a lot of well-intended people. But I have to tell you, in my personal life and in my professional life, I have come up against some really nasty situations. And
Right.
so when you approached me, I said, yeah, I'd love to do this. Not because I want to come on here and be all boo hooey and, whatever, but it's a taboo subject. I was sharing with you the other day, one of my clients was originally, after a while in her young adulthood, was moved to a group home to live so she could live independently, and so that her mom and her father could have some freedom. Unfortunately, she was raped, but she was cognitively able enough to say, I want
Hmm.
to keep the baby.
Right.
The mom didn't want her to, and it's not that she didn't want to love the grandchild, but the mom knew it would fall on her to do most of
Hmm.
the raising. And so the mom wound up bringing her home. Obviously, there was no more living in a group home, and the grandma did, raise her, and, well, cared for her and raised the grandchild, with the mom's help, but it was
Right.
with the grandma. And so to say that these things don't happen and just, sweep it under the rug is not something I can do. But I also, this might shock people, but when it comes to in terms of being a caregiver, okay, of any kind, even if you're doing it as your profession, if you're a direct support staff person, which is what is the title for most of these positions,
Okay.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And it could be really draining and really overwhelming. So
Hmm.
not only am I here to say that we need to do something to stop the abuse and keep the abusers out of the wrong put them in the profession that won't bring that out in them, so to speak.
Right.
But we also have to provide more supports for families, for direct support staff, for administrators who are overseeing all of these things,
Hmm.
because it's a systemic problem, not just a familial problem, you know?
Well, we were talking the other day, you can have the person who is the most well-intentioned
Mhm.
and wants to care for the person, and whether this is, caring for your elderly
Yep.
grandfather, or taking care of your child who has a cognitive or a physical disability, and it may be going fine for years, but if there's no support for that person to allow that person to be something other than a
A
caregiver,
caregiver.
we all
Yep.
have that innate need,
Yep.
and we've realized how critical self-care is, that resentment can build and build and build, and to be like, I'm nothing but,
Yep. And then
a caregiver for this person. And then that resentment can be taken out, even though that person didn't start out that way.
absolutely. On the flip side, it can happen with the person who's dependent on that person. They could get tired of being, quote unquote, told what to do, or they want to be able to make some of their own decisions, and they feel like they're not being able to make their own decisions. And so that also, there's abuse, and this is a whole other conversation that we can have another time. But there's
Right.
abuse from the to the caregiver,
Right. Right.
and a lot of that, and a lot of what you just described as caregiver just at the end of their rope because they just don't have any more to give, could be avoided.
Yeah.
Like, most of the abuse that I have witnessed professionally, against some of my clients with physical and cognitive disabilities, has been because there's just too much overwhelm from the caregiver, and even from the person who needs the caregiving. There's too much dependency
Right.
on each other. And then the other thing that often happens is the caregiver is so used to being in a caregiver role that when the person with the disability starts to get more comfortable working with staff, taking them out in the community, or taking them, there's something called respite, which you may or may not be familiar with, but it's where and it can be in-home respite, or you can actually go to a respite house for the weekend, and you can socialize with other residents, and you can and you kind of get a mini vacation. But there's unfortunately not enough funding money to substantiate the need, to fill the need, and there's just not enough staff. And the reason there's not enough staff, these are things that we can change. We can start paying people living wages for helping other people. And there needs to be training.
Yes.
One of the best ways to avoid abuse is training.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the parents who take home their child, or, whether it's at birth or after an accident, or somebody who takes guardianship over their parent who now needs help because of physical or cognitive disabilities. And it's just like, okay, here you go. Whereas,
Yep.
with some mandatory classes of,
Yep.
listen, this is what you're getting yourself into. And you need to think about these things, and you need to be committed to your self-care, and you need to be committed to helping this person be as independent as they possibly can.
Absolutely.
Without getting into that trap of, well, I'll do it because it's easier.
It's faster, it's easier, it's all
Yep,
that.
it's quicker, and I can just grab that instead of rearranging everything to allow it to be at a level where you can get it, or taking 10 minutes to make a decision with somebody versus I can just make a decision for you, and it's happened right away. I wanted to just quickly add into this whole conversation the comment that Kim had made, and hello Kim, by the way, and Christopher and Hollywood and everyone who's come in since, is that one of the reasons we can look at in terms of the disparate statistics is that people with a disability don't want to be seen as helpless or want to be seen as a victim. So maybe that is a part of the reason why they might not want to come forth with
It definitely
admitting an abuse, because I'm trying to be all independent and everything, and if I admit that I've been the victim of abuse sometimes, that's going to make all my other efforts seem less than somehow.
You're absolutely correct. People with disabilities often do feel like they're being infantilized, or others are seeing them as a victim, or like I'm a person with a disability. I have CP. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. There's other there's secondary things that come along with having a neuromuscular disability that I contend with that people can't see. So when they show themselves, people are like, "What the heck?" You know, and I'm like, "Hi, welcome to a neuromuscular disability." I mean, but the interesting thing is when you're already seen as less than or someone or something to be pitied. You don't want to add another layer of pity or like, oh my God, I couldn't protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's another reason why the statistics might be so, vastly different is because people who are physically able and more cognitively able do fight back more. I know some don't out of fear and whatever, and I understand that completely. Um, my ex-husband was very abusive, not as much physically with me. He was physically abusive with me twice, and I basically told him, you better hope you knock me out because
Mm-hmm.
the only way you're going to succeed. Um, but he tended to be more physically abusive with our son. Um, and when I would go to protect our son, that's when he would, and I just would be like, yo, think about what you're doing, because
Mm-hmm.
think about what you're doing. But he was extremely verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and even financially abusive in a way of control.
And I
Which,
want to get into that whole your whole situation as to kind of how that all happened with your husband. But one thing that I just want to
yeah, that's
point
fine.
out real quick is, even as we're talking with you about the reasons behind why
Mhm,
these statistics are so vast in terms of um, abled versus disabled, I think we see this with all the different vulnerable populations, and just as we were talking about this with a disabled person maybe not reporting because they don't want to be a victim or
mhm.
feel helpless. My brain automatically went to I can see the situations where kids are told that they're less than, or they know that there's already
Yep.
problems in the family, so
Mhm.
if they report they're just going to be adding to it.
Yep.
So again, it's a fear base of
Yep.
keeping them,
Yeah.
it's an internal fear
It's
base of
it's
keeping them quiet, and I just
absolutely.
see the parallels.
There's parallels everywhere, and that's where I go back to. And you're going to hear me say this a lot today, people who are here live and people on the replay. It all goes back to people are people. And there's
Absolutely.
always going to be differences and similarities depending on the population that you are part of. So a child isn't going to report as much or be honest when asked because of fear, but also because they love if their parent is, if the abuser is their parent or a relative or even a close, a friend, there's a connection there
Yes.
in that regard. So they're not going to want to see, they don't want to be the cause of somebody they love getting.
Right, causing more discord, and the abusers rely on that. And
Absolutely.
I can see it in we liken that, it's a caregiver role, whether it is with
Absolutely.
able-bodied people or disabled-bodied
Doesn't
people.
matter.
It's
Doesn't matter.
still that, reliance on another person and not wanting to cause discord within that. Before we get into your story, I
Yeah,
just
that's
wanted
fine.
to pull up a few comments that
Absolutely. I've been trying to read them
people.
as they go up, but
So Kim says, when I'm advocating for a friend of mine at the hospital, some less experienced staff will look at me and ask questions. And I pointedly look at the person in need. That usually helps, just
yep,
like you were
yep,
saying.
yep,
And I think that's something that we can all keep in mind. And again, that people are people, and kids are kids are people too, even though they're just in
yep,
smaller bodies. And
exactly.
I think until we're presented with the situation where it's like this person cannot respond for themselves or whatever, that we need to be addressing each person
Yep,
individually until we're given some evidence that, that they can't, right? That they can't advocate for themselves, or they can't have an opinion of their own.
Absolutely. And even the most limited child in with with their verbal skills, or a person with a disability, child or adult or somewhere in between, there's always a way that they're communicating. And I know there might be some people that say, "Oh, Sharon, you're so, Pollyanna," but no, there really is, because
Mm-hmm.
children will communicate through their behavior. So a child that avoids is avoiding for a reason. They might
Mm-hmm.
not be able to articulate emotionally or physically. They might not have the ability or the skill set yet to really articulate what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So you will find, and this is true of people with disabilities as well, to keep it, in line with what we're talking about today, there will be certain cues that you can look for. You can watch how they react to a certain staff member or family member or bus driver, or, I mean, because literally a person with a disability who is physically limited and or cognitively limited, they can be dependent on somebody for their every need.
Right.
There
Right.
are, like I said, there's gamut. Any disability, by the way, has a range of how it affects people, right? There are some people that are on ventilators that
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't be breathing if a machine wasn't helping them breathe. Now, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I have known of situations where caregivers have shut off the ventilator.
Oh my God.
I have
That's
known
just horrid.
I know of situations where people who need assistance to go to the bathroom have been told, "I can't lift you," and they've walked out on them and left them with nothing being done for the day. So
Right.
my thing about all of this is abuse happens for a multitude of reasons, but a few that I want to bring up today, and it's not a complete list. So if I'm missing something that applies to your situation, it's not out of, not caring or
Mm-hmm.
carelessness, but abuse happens because people don't understand, they have different reactions to. You know what I'm saying? And what they can't
Mm-hmm.
wrap their brain around, they might have a different reaction to. They also, in a caregiver's
Mm-hmm.
defense, because I had to learn this from, about my parents and about other people that helped me, sometimes they get frustrated that they just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, when I was growing up, he could lift me like, he could throw me around like a sack of potatoes, no big deal. But as he got older,
Right.
and as my body changed, and as I get older, I haven't necessarily lost my independence, but I'm not able to do things in the exact same way, and he's not. So there is no
Mm-hmm.
more throwing me around like a rag doll. So when I go visit my parents in Florida, there's a lot of tension between me and my father a lot of times, and it's because I wish I could do more, so I could be a little bit more independent in a non accessible environment. Their place is accessible to a point, but they can't make it completely accessible for me because it wouldn't be accessible for them. So I like to bring up, I like to show both sides, because that's
Right.
where I really feel like more support. People say it takes a village to raise a child, right? But if you
Mm-hmm.
really think about it, it takes a village for anybody to be able to do anything. There is nobody in this world that is completely independent for everything they need. You've
Right.
you've gotten your job because somebody you knew somebody or saw something. It wasn't always you seeing it. It was people connecting you to different opportunities. You found your doctor maybe because your parents used that doctor, or a service provider who you trusted said, "I'm going to send you to this person." And sometimes you just found your provider because that's where you were sent, and the provider stunk, but you went on to look. So none of this in my opinion, none of this has a clear cut you can't say this is definitely a reason or this is definitely a fix. There's gray areas in each scenario, but I also feel like we like to complicate things. I'm not saying things are easy. Things are complicated and they can be very difficult, but they're a lot simpler, and the solutions would be a lot simpler if we would get out of our own way.
It is, as you were saying, if for no other reason, as independent as you may think that you are, we all need connection. And I think that, it's one of the main reasons this place is here, whether it's connection through trauma or just because you feel, feel akin to what people have gone through. And so even loners, you
Yep.
still need, even whether it's through gaming in an avatar, that's still a form of
Absolutely.
connection. We're human beings, and that's what we need.
Mhm.
And I think when we get down to it, abuse is about power dynamics.
Yes, it is.
No matter what kind of abuse it
Doesn't
is,
matter.
it's always about power dynamics. And some of that may be unintentional, like we were talking about, the caregiver is getting, frustrated and
Mhm.
is lashing out because that's just how they're doing it.
Yeah.
And you see that with, able-bodied people too, right? Not even in a
Yeah.
caregiver, well, let's say not in a caregiver situation, but just parent-child, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's still
Absolutely.
caregiver. And we're going to get into your story. And what I want to challenge people is, as Sharon's discussing her story, if you didn't know that she was in a wheelchair and that she had some limitations, would you know, just based on her story, that she's going to go through? And I'm going to bet most of you can relate to some piece of what she's going to be discussing. And just because of her experience, because it doesn't matter that she's disabled
Mhm.
or versus somebody who is able. The statistics are the way they are because of the vulnerabilities, right? And
Mhm.
the level of and the different dynamics and societal. But at its core, this abuse is going to be something that everybody can relate to. Um, just the reason why it may have or how it may have come about can be a little bit different.
Mhm.
Um, I just
So
want
yeah.
to comment. Indigo says, I relate to having a disability show up due to injury. It's changed my life and I've had to advocate so much for myself. It's frustrating being brushed off because I'm a woman as well. So
It
yeah.
is, and there is truth to what you're saying, Indigo, and I just want to take a moment to validate it, and we can have another conversation about that too. But I fall into um, multiple categories as well. I'm a woman with a
Mm-hmm.
disability. I'm also a wheelchair user, which
Mm-hmm.
makes me, even more physically vulnerable. And
Right.
so, yes, you're correct. You can fall into a multiple category where you're seen as vulnerable or less than, or whatever wording you want to use. But I think the important thing, there's a lot that we can say is important to remember around this issue. But abuse, no matter what form it comes in or why, it has come into your life, abuse changes you. It
Yeah.
just does. It imprints on you. And
Mm-hmm.
for anybody that says you get to a point where you've learned to cope and you're completely able to cope, I really want to take a step back for a minute and just say, I'm not one to give people excuses. I don't even give myself, the right to have an excuse. But there's a difference between an excuse and acknowledging your truth. And the truth
Mm-hmm.
is, even if you've overcome, and I put that in quotes, your abuse, and you've worked
Mm-hmm.
through a lot of the trauma, there are still going to be times in your life where something is going to bring you back to that moment and
Yep.
trigger it. Now, how it'll trigger you, the intensity of that trigger may have gone down a lot. But there's also times where that trigger will trigger you just as intensely as if you were experiencing right at the moment. The difference is you now trust that you have resources that you can go to.
Yes.
Because it's not only about being able to use your coping strategies like your breathing and your imagery, it's about knowing that you can trust yourself to help yourself get through whatever the situation is, however you need to.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean not needing help. And, trust, I was sharing this with Mac the other day. Trust is not something, I used to be a very trusting person. And I say used to be because that ended for me when I was a kid, because I experienced a lot of different situations where I was abused, bullied, for reasons I didn't understand and reasons I couldn't do anything about. I couldn't change the fact that I had a disability.
Right.
And, but here's the thing. It's really hard to do. But the one thing we have to acknowledge is that abuse, because we are silenced about it a lot of times. There's very few people that will experience abuse and then immediately say something about it. Because, and the reason there's multiple reasons, but one of the biggest reasons, and I've done research on this, it's not just my personal opinion or experience, although that is true, is because the abusers are really good manipulators. They're really good at gaslighting us and making us think that we're the crazy ones and that this is normal. And I know this is going to be hard to say, and this comes from healing, a level of healing. But if you're going through abuse right now, or you're in the thick of like your healing and you're not able, there's gonna come a time where you're going to be able to look at the situation, and you're not going to excuse your abuser, but trust me, you're going to feel bad for them. And you're not going to feel bad like in the way that you might be thinking, but you are going to reach a point where, and I don't expect you to believe me right now if you're in the thick of it, but because I used to tell people you're crazy, you're out of your mind. But I can honestly say, as I sit here today, I do not wish one iota of bad karma on my ex-husband. I don't. Let him live and be well, but let him stay away from me and stay, he's my ex for a reason. But it took me a while to get there. And part of the reason it took me a while to get there was because I was mad at myself, because I had always promised myself that I would not wind up in an abusive relationship. And I know that is something that you can all relate to. And this is where I say, it doesn't matter that I have a disability. It's the human side of it. And the other thing that I've come to realize is most abusers, and I'm not going to say anything that you guys don't know right now, but most abusers abuse because their self-esteem is as high off the ground as an ant is off the ground. Doesn't make it right. And this is, but these are the things that you start to recognize. And instead of you walking around with resentment and anger, you start to feel empathy for what they're lacking, and that they have to put it off on everybody else, and they can't look inward, because that if they were able to make some of those changes, they would feel better. That does not,
right. It doesn't excuse their behavior, but it comes from the idea that the forgiveness is for you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to, you may not wish, you may get to the point where you don't wish bad on that person. You may not wish well on that
Well, that's what I was
person.
going to say. I
That
don't
person's just
necessarily,
like,
I don't necessarily wish
it's
well on
just,
them either.
let's just say that they're just a non-entity, because
Right.
holding on to that resentment, holding on to that anger, that only hurts ourselves. And that
Exactly.
is one of the hardest things. And certainly when I realized that, my child on child abuse, when I realized that that person was probably being abused themselves,
Mm-hmm.
I know physically, and I'm pretty sure sexually, either he was or he witnessed his sister being
Right.
abused. You can understand how that cycle continued.
Mhm.
And you're right, we're not excusing it at all,
No.
but
But
we
to
you
come to
come
a
to a
level of
point.
understanding
Yes.
actually helps you. It helped me. And I know that from the people that I've worked with and helped them through this stuff, it has helped them come to a level of peace within themselves to say,
Right.
because when we're abused or when we experience abuse, I don't care who you are, how self confident you were before you met your abuser or before the abuse started happening, you insidiously start to change. And for many, I know for me, it was very insidious, very slow. I went from
Mm-hmm.
being a very confident, independent person to being a very skittish, very
Mm-hmm.
almost dependent person because I was too afraid to fight back and say, like, I'll give you a really benign example, but it'll illustrate this. So
Mm-hmm.
I I lived on my own before I met my ex-husband. So I cooked for myself. I did my own laundry, all these things. And I did them differently. I had to get them done differently than somebody who is
Mm-hmm.
able-bodied would, right? In the beginning, he was very supportive of leaving everything the way I needed it to be done. Well, the way I needed it to be situated so that I could be a participating member of our household. As time went on, he started to say, "No, I'm going to move these pots and I'm going to put them up here." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, but then you're going to come home on your late nights and you're going to say, how come dinner's not made yet?" And I'm going to say, "Well, how the heck was I supposed to reach the pot?" And I could tell you exactly where I was sitting and exactly where he was standing when we had this conversation. Because we were in
Mm-hmm.
the kitchen, he was moving pots, and I said, "You're going to resent me." And he turned around and said, "I'm never going to resent you for something that you can't control. And where am I going? I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to hurt you. Let me move the pots so we have more storage, space."
Mm-hmm.
Well, fast forward
Just
a
for
few
that window.
years, he comes home. "I have to do everything. Dinner, I make dinner every night." So my point being is that slowly, all the I was bullied severely from the end of middle school all the way through high school, like severely bullied. The reason that's relevant is because after I worked through that with years of therapy and got my confidence up, I am completely convinced that the reason I met my ex-husband was because I was completely independent. I had become completely a confident version of myself. Because if I wasn't any of that, I don't think he would have given me the time of day. But
Mm.
and I promised myself that nobody would ever get me back to the point of how I felt about myself when I was in high school and even in college to a certain extent. And it happened.
Right.
It took me years to get over the anger with myself and the disappointment in myself. But I'm here to say this for a reason because I don't care if you have a disability, if you don't have a disability. If anybody's being abused, and most of you who have this history will know this, it's a process.
Yeah.
And you have to be kind and patient with yourself. Because I think the hardest part for me was being mad at myself for saying, "How did I not see this? I said I would never let this happen. How did I let this happen?" But when you have a disability, I'm not making an excuse, but it is, I think, easier to allow it to happen without even realizing it's happening. Because at first, when we got married, we just took on like, like relationship roles. Like he did
Right.
this, I did
Division of
this.
labor,
Right.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But over time, my own husband at the time would say to me, I'm just going to do it because it's faster if I do it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
this if I do it. And it's the laundry will stay folded nicer if I do it. And I used to say to him jokingly, but seriously, I said, well, that's an opinion because
Mm-hmm.
you fold cockeyed. But okay, but, and so I remember my parents, after they found out, because I told nobody that we were having marital problems. So when we finally came out that we were getting divorced, everybody went, oh my God, what do you mean? You are like the ideal.
Right,
We
right,
wanted to be you. And I said, hell no, you didn't. But I
right.
remember having many a conversation with my parents where I had to convince them that these things were really happening because my he's a very charismatic individual. So
Mm-hmm.
he can get people to believe things about him that are not necessarily what your experience is going to be if you're living with him or and so that was another, and this is another reason why I think people don't disclose whether you have a disability or not, but it's certainly if you have a disability and you're used to having to defend your every being.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a doctor and you have a disability, like you said, they're going to talk to your parent. Like when I was growing up, they would talk to my parents. And finally I would say, really? Okay, because she has no idea what my legs feel like. She has no idea what my throat feels like, except for what I'm
Right,
describing to her. So wouldn't it be better for you to get the descriptors from me? you know?
right,
But it took me a
right.
while to get there. And so I was so disappointed in myself when I realized that I had allowed it to happen. But I realized I allowed it to happen, not totally being conscious of it. And some of it
No, it's
was,
so gradual.
yeah,
It
and
is
it was
so gradual.
it became fear based. It became really fear based, and it became, how am I going to get people to believe me over him? Because this was going to, and I was able, and I know people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I had such a hard time, and it took me a long time in therapy because I would say to my therapist, but he's in so much pain, and I'm his wife, and I want to help him. I want to
Mm-hmm.
help him get through. It's obvious that he's in pain. And I swear to you, my therapist finally had to say, F him. He doesn't, he's no, just, I mean, because I had an ongoing relationship with this therapist from years ago. Like I would leave and come back. And so
Right, right.
but I'm saying this because I want you guys to remember a few things. Whatever your situation is, there are going to be some differences. I don't care if it's the fact that you have a disability that makes some of the situation different, or if you come from a culture where certain behaviors are culturally acceptable, but now you're in your partner doesn't understand your culture, whatever it is, it it doesn't matter. The one thing that you have to remember, and it takes time, is you have to be your own best friend.
Yeah.
Nobody, it
Mhm.
it took me so long, but I stopped needing people to believe me because I knew
Mhm.
my truth. And
Well, and
also,
in your situation too, and I think a lot of people who when we're talking about an intimate partner relationship,
mhm,
what you project to the outside world, yeah, can be wholly different on the
totally
inside.
different.
And if you've never given anyone any indication that there's anything wrong,
Yep,
it's human nature not to want to think the worst of somebody or to think that
exactly,
that's possible, or so we automatically want to go, no, no, it can't be that bad, or we want to
exactly,
just kind of downplay things, and
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. But I,
absolutely.
I really think no matter who you are, no matter what your situation is, I mean, I know that I am an eternal optimist and I'm not going to change that about myself. But I believe that most of these issues around abuse and just the human struggles would be so much simpler to solve if we just went about things a little bit differently. And it doesn't have to be
Hmm.
like these major steps, but I don't believe, and this is my own belief, I'm not saying that anybody else, but I've really thought about this, and I don't really believe that anybody comes into this world, I think we come into this world with a blank slate. And yes, our DNA predisposes us to certain things, but it doesn't mean just because we're predisposed that we're going to wind up having Alzheimer's or whatever it is. There is a lot of environmental
Mm-hmm.
situations that occur, and many times abuse is a form of stress that's happening for the person. I had a client that, I swear to you, for the longest time, he thought when you get angry with people, you punch them in the face. And he thought that was like just what you do, because that was his reality.
Right.
He did something wrong. There was no, why'd you do that? What happened? It was just a slap across the face that left welts and marks. And nobody should have to do that. Nobody should have to experience that. But if there was more support,
Yeah.
and more education, and this is one of the things, this is just something I really need to say. At least here in America, our education system really now focuses on the academics and getting our kids able to pass tests so they can go on and be these geniuses. And we're not putting enough into social emotional learning, and what kids used to learn on the playground. If you stole somebody's toy out of the sandbox, they didn't want you back in the sandbox, and you had to work that out. But there's not enough support. There's many parents who are single parents. I don't care if you're a mother, father, guardian, I don't care. There's many parents who are single parents. There are many parents who are, they're a two-parent household, but they're working. So I think that we need to look at what are the triggers for an abuser to be an abuser. Is it what they've learned? Is it stress from them, what they're experiencing? I don't think there's a one answer. I think it's
No, absolutely. I think it goes, again, it goes back to support services. I mean, I think, in general, today we're much more open to the idea of mental health being important,
absolutely.
but we still don't have the resources for really your average person, particularly if you're below average income,
Absolutely.
to access enough support. And it's a shame. I mean, we could have a whole nother discussion
And we
on
probably will.
social. Yeah, exactly. As I said, this is an overview. We plan on having this be a continuing conversation, but
Yeah.
social services are often the first things that get cut. And when we look at things long term, I think that we need to start realizing that social services are the things that are supporting and preparing people for the future.
Absolutely.
And, that's even more critical, than scoring
Yeah.
perfect on the test.
Yeah, because I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm very much, even though I'm an optimist, I'm very much a realist. But I've really done a lot of thinking after experiencing my own situations, and the bullying, to the abuse that I faced in my marriage, to trying to articulate that my son was being abused and helping him articulate it. But even with that, I had to be careful, because I have a disability, and I knew, I can't say I knew, but I had this feeling that if I tried to push and say that things were happening, he would say that I wasn't, because of my disability, I was not, a qualified to take
Able to
care.
be a single
Yeah,
mom.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so there's a lot that goes into that as well, and that could be a whole other conversation. But I really, I want what I want and I'm sure that there's a lot of people here that would agree, because I think that ultimately we all have this similar, basic needs, and we all have similar, just basic desires. And so part of my work is to be the voice for people who cannot and are too scared to or will not talk about subjects that are, quote, taboo. But one
Mm-hmm.
of my most important things that I want for myself, and I'm a work in progress, I'm not perfect at any of this. And what I want for others is to truly come to the place where you can be your own best friend, where you
Mm-hmm.
can give yourself the same grace and kindness that you give to others, because truly that's where it starts.
Yeah.
I really didn't make a ton of progress, even with all my therapies. I made progress, but my true progress started to happen when I started to truly accept myself for
Mm-hmm.
my assets. And I started speaking about the things I'm good at with confidence. And I also started
Right.
speaking about my faults with confidence. One of my faults apparently is that I'm a hand talker. I can't stop that.
Join the club.
And,
Join the club. That's
and
how I was
I'm not
raised.
and I'm not going to stop that. But initially, because I was bullied, because I was abused, because I was put down a lot by people, because people looked at me from a what I couldn't do, because that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing we do to people with disabilities. Because we have documented deficits, we tend to look at people based on their deficits. And I swear part of my mission is to flip the script, because people need to be seen for what they bring to the table, not what they take away from the table. And
Absolutely.
if we can do that more, we can really
Mm-hmm.
have an impact. So one of the things, an acquaintance of mine, about a year ago, almost a year ago, lost her son in a tragic motorcycle accident. But he was a child that struggled academically and with mental health, but he had found his path. He was going to be an electrician, doing really well. But all growing up, and I didn't know this till after he passed, he had a quote that he lived by. And I really want to share that quote with you guys, if it's okay with
Mm-hmm.
Matt.
Yeah.
But he said, "Be who you are and let the world love that person."
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that includes your faults, because guess what? We all have them. But if you've experienced abuse, no matter what form of abuse you've experienced, it is not your fault. Nothing you did deserves any of that. I don't care what you've done in your life. You do not, nobody deserves to be abused.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
if you take away anything from today, besides it not being your fault, it is really necessary and it's okay for you to give yourself grace and accept yourself for some of your human faults. And they're not what your abuser told you necessarily.
Right.
You have to start to really look at yourself and really start to like, I mean, it was hard for me. I couldn't even take a compliment for years, like even as a kid. And it was through therapy. One of my therapists said to me, um, um, when I give you a compliment, and from now on, when somebody outside gives you a compliment, just say thank you. Don't say
Right.
anything else. And I know that might sound silly, but eventually you really start to believe things about yourself that
Yeah.
will counteract what your abuser had you thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not your fault. And if you're struggling, there, reach out, because I
Yes.
promise you, there's so many more people that are going to be helped by your story than you even know, because you're not alone and they need to know that they're not alone. It took me
Yeah.
years to be able to talk about the abuse that my son and I went through in my marriage, for a lot of reasons. And we can continue that, in one of our next conversations. But it's liberating
Mm-hmm.
when you can become your own best friend, and it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
And even when you become your own best friend, if you're anything like me, if you're not careful, you can start going down that rabbit hole again of, you know,
Oh, absolutely. I've been on my healing journey for just this long, and
yeah,
there are things, as you mentioned, you can be as healed, right, from
Yeah.
our trauma as we think we are. And yet, when I was having to write my chapter and I was really
Mhm.
putting myself back in those positions and asking questions as if I was a kid again,
Yep.
the next 24 to 48 hours, I was in a real funk. And I
It
came on and I talked about it and I said, I realized like how much that affected me, like
Yep.
putting myself back and being, having my inner child talk to myself basically,
Yep.
as I was doing that. And so it is as we say so many times on here, we're always healing from something,
Yep.
we're always learning more, and healing isn't linear, and we're going to take steps back, and sometimes our steps can be fumbles for just a little bit, and sometimes we get sucked into spirals, and those
Yep.
spirals can last years. We
They
there's
can.
there's no right or wrong way to go about healing either.
Nope.
And definitely,
It's
as
also
Indigo
a
says,
grieving
she's
process.
realizing how important connection is. And it's easier to, Deaudre says she mentions
I
the
think
urge
she
to
mentioned.
isolate is strong, and then it's 100% because
Yep.
we learn that there's safety in that. We
Yep.
go back to what we feel is safe.
You have to
And
do. You'll go back to what you know, and that also will explain. And I know many of you know this. People will say, "Well, why do you keep going back to abuse?" And it's people, unless you've experienced it, it's hard to understand. But we crave what's familiar, even if what's familiar we know intrinsically is not good for us.
right, there's a
Um,
subconsciousness. I mean,
yeah,
that we've talked about this on here before a little bit, that you know people say, why do you always seem to get the bad men or whatever? Well, subconsciously, we are equating X and Y with love,
yep.
or X and Y with acceptance.
Mhm.
And when somebody treats us differently than that, it's like,
It's really weird.
it's
It,
weird, and you want to distrust,
yep.
because it's like, that, wait a minute, well, when's that other shoe going to drop, right? When are you
I'm
going to
the
show
queen.
your
I
true
was the queen
colors?
of that. I'd be like, this is too good to be true.
Yep.
Literally, like the shoe's about to drop, and it's going to drop from like 20 feet above, and I'm just going to be like a pancake when it happens. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely haven't been ignoring the rest of your comments, guys. You guys are having a great conversation alongside with us, and
yeah,
sharing your issues and supporting one another. And that's 100%, what this space is about. And I hope that what you can see from Sharon's conversation and your own experiences is, again, how similar they are. The reasons why it might got brought about is different. The dynamic might be a little bit different, but we can all relate on some level
we
if
are
you've
we are a
had
lot
some
more.
form of abuse.
I'm sorry, we are a lot
Go
more
ahead.
alike than we
Yes.
are different, and so I kind of challenge you guys in a good way to start looking for what makes people similar to you. And I also want to say really quickly before if we have to end, is if you're being abused in any form, fashion, or whatever, you do not have to stay in that abuse. Okay, so really quick, I'm going to share a really quick story with you. So I had a friend when I was growing up who was extremely abusive to me out of jealousy. She happened to have a disability. And when I would come home and say to my parents, I just can't be her friend anymore. I can't. Like, she would leave physical marks on me. She would break my wheelchair. And my parents, well meaning, would say, look, Sharon, you want to be understood. You want to be included. You have to understand that might be part of her disability. And so finally I turned around to my father when I was older and a teenager, because
Hmm.
I wasn't as good of friends with her, but she was still in the picture. And I finally turned around to my father and I said, excuse me, sir, love you to death, but do you like everybody with blue eyes? And he looked at me like I was an alien for another planet and said,
Mm-hmm.
why would I like everybody with blue eyes? And I said, I don't know. I have a disability. I'm supposed to like everybody with a disability. You have blue eyes. Maybe you should like everybody with blue eyes. And he said, well, no, there are some people with blue eyes that are absolute jerks.
Yeah.
And I turned around to him and I said, oh, isn't that interesting? Well, you know what? There are people with disabilities who are absolute jerks. And I
Yeah,
don't have to be their friend because they're a jerk. So
exactly.
focus on what we're similar with, but also understand that you can have compassion for somebody's situation. I had compassion for the fact that she had a disability. I had compassion for the fact that she was jealous of certain things that she thought I had that she didn't. But that didn't mean I was going to stick around and let her abuse me.
Right.
Because
It doesn't mean that your boundaries have to be violated
right,
because of that. It doesn't mean that we
right.
have to like somebody because
You can
they're similar to
understand
us in some sort of way. You know, there are other
exactly.
people who have experienced abuse who I can feel compassion for, but you know what? I think they're absolute biatches,
Yep,
just
yep.
because that's their personality. And I can, yeah, I can empathize and I can have compassion for that person, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily have to be my friend.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think your
exactly.
point's well taken. And it goes back to we are people first, and
Hmm.
there's good and bad and every, every race, every gender, every sexual orientation, there's good people and there's bad people. There's people that you're going to get along with and there's people that you're not going to get along with for unknown reasons. There's people
Exactly.
that you talk to and you just kind of click and you just, it's like
Yep.
and there's other people that you come up with and you're just like, okay, we just have nothing to talk about. There's not, even though we
Exactly.
have like common interests, this
Yeah.
conversation is just not going so
It's just like it's
well.
okay. This is like being in a rush hour traffic. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah,
So
this is just not working out. And as Ben says, jerkdom knows no bounds, and
yep,
100%,
yep.
100% true. And yeah, good people and bad people come in all different shapes, sizes,
But,
colors,
yep.
walks of life, right? Um, we talked about continuing on this conversation and
Hmm.
continuing it on with having kind of a panel of people, whether you're able bodied, whether you consider yourself a disability. We are going to be talking about financial abuse. That's something
Hmm.
that I have had on the list that I haven't addressed. We're also going to be talking about emotional abuse and intimate partnerships.
Hmm.
Um, and those are definitely two topics that I'm interested in speaking about broadly, but then also speaking about on a panel of having people who are abled and disabled. So if
Hmm.
you are interested in either of those subjects, please email me survivingtogether sass at gmail.com. I'll put that up here for a minute and just let me know that hey, yes, I'm interested in coming on a panel. I'm interested in talking about this particular subject, and we'll see what we can work out, because as Sharon and I discussed, there's so much that we can talk about with this, and I think we're going to find out that there's more similarities than there are dissimilarities,
Absolutely.
but that there are definitely um, different challenges
Right.
that are
It
posed
manifests
if you're
itself
coming.
differently. It manifests
Yes,
itself
exactly. Yep,
differently.
great
It,
way of
you
saying
know,
it.
yeah.
Yep,
I want to, before we go, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on and have this conversation with you. How much I am grateful for our connection and for all the work that you do. Um,
absolutely.
and I want to thank everybody that was here live. And for those of you, I was reading the comments as fast as I could. I want to thank you for sharing your situations, not only with each other, but with us. And if you want, I love to connect with people and I love to connect people with people. So the best place to find me right now, because my website is under like all kinds of changes, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I'm also on Facebook though, but you can drop me a DM or a private message on either platform and I'd be happy to connect with you. And I just want to encourage each and every one of you, um, you know, if you're at a place where you're struggling right now and you're afraid to say anything, or you're saying something but you're not being heard, please just keep speaking until you're finally heard. You will find that person who will hear you. And I, you know, I'm a judgment-free zone. Um, Pretty much anybody who knows me will tell you that. So if you need an extra person to support you, or if something that I said resonated with you and you'd like to talk to me further, just reach out. Okay?
And I would say you're going to send me a list of
Yes.
your books and your
Yes.
links and stuff. If you can just put your LinkedIn or any
Absolutely.
of your
I'll give you
connection
everything.
information. Yep, just send that to me, guy. So guys, I will be posting that within, the next few days or whenever Sharon gets it to me, and I'll post it in the video description so you can come on back and look for that. And if you don't see it and you were interested in something, just email me and I can either make a connection happen or I can get you the information that you're looking for. So Sharon, I want to thank you so much for connecting with me first and foremost, in regards to my book, and for being so supportive in regards to, helping me through that situation. I know that I've got a little
You're
more
going to
work I
write
need to
more.
do. I
You're going
do.
to write
We
more.
definitely are, and I'm hoping to finish my final edits tomorrow, guys, and probably get those over to Sharon and then get them back to peace, and then we'll go through the second rounds. And I just want to thank you for coming on and being so open. And I know that it is, advocating for people with disabilities is a passion of yours, but also just in terms of trauma and abuse in general as well. And
Absolutely.
it
Yep.
connects and it resonates so much with the people in our audience. And
I'm
there may
glad.
be people here who have disabilities who I may not even know about it, because
Yep.
I only know of a lot of you guys in terms of what you put into the comments. And
Yep.
it's not germane to the conversation that we've been having to say, yes, I have an issue. um
And if
I will
And
let
if you don't have a
everybody.
disability, sorry, if you don't have a disability, you could still reach out to me, because, like I said earlier, and I know Mac knows this and she feels the same way, people are people. Um,
Exactly. And it's a wonderful conversation. And for me personally, and this is something I have not shared with anybody yet, um, but because of my 20 plus years of Lyrica use, one of the side effects is neuropathy, which is numbness. And in the last 4 weeks, it has traveled up my calf, and I'm
mhm.
losing more mobility in my left leg, unfortunately. So this really resonates with me as somebody who may end up in a situation where I never considered myself disabled,
Mhm.
and just how to navigate that world, and
Well, I'm here to support you
keeping in keeping
any
in
way I
mind
can.
that we are people first,
Mhm.
and our disability really is all so secondary to what we have in
Yep.
common. So
And you're not
thank you.
defined by your experiences. You're not
Yeah,
defined by your experiences. You're
we're not
defined.
defined by our limitations, right?
Yep. Yep. You're not defined by your limitations or your experiences. What you're defined by, in my opinion, uh, professionally and personally, is your character. And so one thing you can ask yourself to help yourself through your trauma or through dealing with a disability is ask yourself, when I'm no longer here, how do I want people to remember me? What do I want people to say about me? And do the actions that will support them in remembering you that way.
Um, and so Crystal, I want to mention Crystal's comment. She said, I'm finding it so hard to accept and learn to adapt with my new life with disability. And so, yeah, connecting with Sharon might be a wonderful option for you, Crystal. I think that you guys will find that there's a lot of commonality, and
I would
coming
love
from
to
somebody who's,
I would love to
been
help
in this
you.
situation her whole life, right? And has worked with so many people in the disabled community. So definitely either email me, Crystal. You know how to get a hold of me, and or
And
just
I'll get my links over to you, Matt, quickly
Yep,
so you can.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I'll get that stuff posted here by Monday. Absolutely, you guys will. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So
Yeah.
with that, yeah, I've got some things around here that I need to do. So
It's been
we'll end
great.
it.
Thank
But
you.
this is not the end of the conversation. It was just the beginning. And I'm so thankful that you were here. And I'm glad I got to introduce you to our wonderful, sassy community here.
I'm glad
And
to be a part of it. And so thank you. I
thank,
can't thank you enough.
oh, absolutely. Thank you. And I'll talk to you soon. All
Absolutely.
right.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Sharon.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
All right, guys. Well, with that, we're going to close for the day. And I want to challenge you. And yes, this is one of the reasons I'm trying to get my comments up, but I'm going to challenge you to write one comment. And I want you to write something that you're good at, something, a good belief about yourself. It can be anything. It can be, I do, I'm excellent at doing a yo-yo. It doesn't matter. But I want to challenge you to find one good thing to say about yourself, to say about your abilities, to say about who you are, and put that in the comments section. Also, if you haven't liked or subscribed, if you could please do that before you head out. The liking helps with the algorithm. And if you don't subscribe, you won't get our notifications for when we're on, but we are on every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Eastern and Saturday live at 3 p.m. Eastern. So definitely be back here to see you next on Wednesday at Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. I am working on a collab with Sammy from After the Bars. We haven't got a time set for that yet, but when I do, I will post out some information on that. It will probably be on a different day. So look for something. It might not be after his daughter goes back to school, so maybe in September after Labor Day, but that'll be coming down the pike as well. So I want to challenge you to write one good thing in the comments. You'll have to wait till the song's over and wait like 30 seconds after that, and then you'll be able to make a comment. With that, I want to leave you with, remember, you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are loved just the way you are for who you are. So hugs and love from me. You guys have a great rest of your weekend. Surviving together, never alone. Bye, guys.
Through the fire, through the rain, we have walked through endless pain, but we stand, we rise again, stronger now, we break the chain, surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. Every tear, every scar tells the story of who we are. Not just survivors, but warriors too. With love as our armor, we see this through. We see you, we hear you, and we believe We see you, we hear you.